The first time the voice came through the PA, I thought it was a test. It wasn't loud. It wasn't distorted. It didn't even sound urgent. It was calm, almost casual, like someone had pressed the button by mistake and leaned too close to the microphone without realizing the whole building could hear them. And the first thing it said was my name. Just my name. Nothing before it. Nothing after. By the time I stood up from my desk, the speakers had already gone silent again. I remember looking at the ceiling, waiting for the click that usually follows an announcement ending. Waiting for some second message. Some explanation. A correction. There wasn't one. The building just settled back into its usual after-midnight quiet, and I was left standing there with the very specific feeling that something had just started. At the time, I was working overnight operations in a regional distribution office for a medical supply company. It wasn't a warehouse exactly, but it wasn't a normal office either. The front half of the building was administrative space, cubicles, conference rooms, accounting, dispatch, all the parts meant for daylight. The back half was shipping coordination, inventory control, and a small secured storage area for temperature-sensitive products. During the day the place felt busy but forgettable. At night it felt like someone had emptied it in a hurry. Rows of dark computer monitors. Hallways lit by motion sensors. Break room refrigerators humming louder than they ever seemed to during business hours. The low mechanical breathing of the HVAC system moving air through ducts above the ceiling tiles. I liked it more than I probably should have. I'd taken the job after a breakup that made being home feel temporary in a way I couldn't explain. My apartment still had my ex's bookshelf against one wall because I hadn't decided if I was keeping it or returning it. There were still 2 coffee mugs by the sink most mornings because I kept forgetting I only needed one now. Night work gave shape to the hours I would have spent thinking. It also paid a little more. So for almost 7 months, my routine stayed the same. I came in at 10:45 p.m., parked under the far security light in the lot, badged through the side entrance, and checked the overnight dashboards in the control room. Alarm panels. Shipping schedules. Temperature alerts. Loading bay sensors. The overnight phone line. By 11:30, everyone else was gone. The cleaning crew usually finished before midnight. Sometimes one of the facility's guys would stay late if a door closer needed adjusting or a sink in one of the bathrooms backed up, but not often. After midnight, the building belonged to me. Or at least that was what I thought then. The PA system wasn't something I paid much attention to. During the day it was used for simple things, delivery arrivals, maintenance requests, asking someone to come to reception, that kind of thing. There were speakers mounted through the admin hallways, in the back operations area, in the break rooms, and above the loading corridor. The control for it sat in a locked cabinet inside the small operations room next to my desk. A cheap gray microphone handset with a coiled cord, a push-to-talk button, and a panel with zone selectors and a green power light. I knew where it was. I'd tested it once during training. After that, I barely thought about it. The first announcement happened at 12:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. I know the exact time because I looked immediately at the clock on my monitor the second the voice stopped. I had been reviewing a delayed freight issue from earlier in the week when the speakers crackled softly overhead. That sound by itself wasn't strange. Old systems do that sometimes. A little electrical pop, a whisper of static. But then the voice came through. My name. Clear. Male, I think. Though even now I wouldn't swear to it. Not deep. Not high. Just neutral enough that my memory won't fully commit. I pushed my chair back so quickly one of the wheels snagged on the floor mat. The operations room was empty except for me. The door to the hall stood open. The cabinet with the PA unit inside it was closed. I walked over and opened it. The green power light was on, same as always. The handset was hanging in place. No zone buttons were active. I checked the hallway outside. Empty. I checked the front desk monitor. Empty lobby. I checked the rear corridor cameras. Empty. Nothing. I stood there for a full minute with the cabinet open, staring at the panel as if I could force it to confess to something mechanical. Eventually I closed it and went back to my desk. I told myself it had to be an accidental page from another part of the building. Maybe a maintenance worker I hadn't noticed leaving late. Maybe someone leaned on the controls earlier and a delayed relay triggered. Maybe the system was routed through another office. All of those explanations were weak, but together they were enough to get me through the rest of the shift. What unsettled me more than the voice itself was how personal it felt. Not threatening. Just direct. The kind of directness that assumes proximity. The next night it happened again. 12:17 a.m. Same faint crackle. Same voice. My name. This time I didn't move right away. I just sat there, my hand still on the keyboard, listening after it stopped. What I heard in the silence afterward bothered me more than the page itself. There was no echo. A normal building-wide announcement gives you that slight smear of sound from multiple speakers. A little overlap. A little distance between zones. This didn't. It sounded close. Not like someone was in the room with me, exactly, but like the page had originated from somewhere inside my part of the building, not from every speaker equally. I got up slower that time and checked the same things I had checked the night before. Front lobby. Empty. Rear hall. Empty. Loading corridor. Empty. Nothing on the camera feeds except the usual fluorescent stillness. I opened the PA cabinet again. Still powered. Still idle. I picked up the handset this time. No dial tone. No open line. Just dead plastic and my own reflection in the dark glass of the cabinet door. I considered waking my manager, but I already knew how that conversation would go. What exactly did it say? My name. Anything else? No. So it could have been a glitch. I could hear the dismissiveness before it happened. That was the part of working overnight nobody prepares you for. Anything weird that happens after midnight has to be significant enough to survive the humiliation of describing it to someone who slept normally through the night. A voice saying your name over an old speaker system doesn't survive that very well. So I logged nothing and said nothing. By the third night, I was waiting for it. Not because I wanted it to happen. Because my body had already started building around it. At 12:10, I found myself checking the time more often. At 12:15, I stopped reading the screen even though my eyes stayed on it. At 12:16, the whole building started to feel slightly more present, the way a room feels when someone else is in it but hasn't spoken yet. Then the speakers clicked. I looked straight at the operations room door. The voice didn't say my name immediately this time. There was a second of static first. Then a low breath close to the mic. Then my name. And after it, quietly. Still there. That was the first full sentence. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and tapped the filing cabinet behind me. The voice was still calm. Still almost conversational. That made it worse. If it had sounded aggressive or theatrical, I could have attached it to a prank, a drunk employee, some obvious human cause. Instead it sounded like someone verifying a detail. Still there. Like they had expected me to be. I walked straight to the PA cabinet and opened it. Nothing had changed. I pressed the intercom test button to see if any zone light stuck or any relay failed. All I got was a soft confirmation beep on the panel. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I checked the access log. There were no entries after 10:46 p.m. when I had badged in. No side door use. No rear hall badge requests. No loading dock door activity. If someone was in the building, they either hadn't used a credential to enter or they were already inside before I got there. I hated how quickly my mind accepted both possibilities. The building itself wasn't large enough to be truly confusing, but at night every familiar space stretches. That's the best way I can describe it. The admin hallway became too long. The copy room felt farther from the break room than it did during the day. The rear operations corridor, with its polished floor and locked internal doors, reflected ceiling light in a way that made distances feel uncertain. After the third announcement, I started making rounds I hadn't made in months. I walked the first floor with a flashlight even though the motion lights turned on ahead of me. I checked conference rooms. Opened the copy room. Looked into the break room at the row of dark vending machines. Walked through the back operations corridor and paused at every door to listen. Nothing. The building sounded exactly like an empty building should. Air. Electric hum. Refrigeration. My own footsteps. I went back to the control room feeling stupid in the way you only feel after searching for something you don't really want to find. At 1:03 a.m., the PA clicked again. I looked up so hard my neck hurt. This time the voice said, "You missed one." Then silence. I checked every camera feed immediately, scanning for an open door or a light that shouldn't be on. Nothing obvious. Then I noticed the loading corridor camera. The fire door at the far end, usually closed, was propped open by maybe 3 inches. I stared at the screen. I had walked that corridor less than 15 minutes earlier. I was certain the door had been shut. I pulled up playback. At 12:58, the corridor was empty and the door was closed. At 1:02, the corridor was still empty. The next frame after a tiny visual stutter showed the door open. No person. No motion. Just a changed state, as if the building had blinked and something had shifted while it did. I went down there in person with my badge, my keys, and a level of irritation that was really just fear dressed in something more acceptable. The corridor was empty. The door stood open 3 inches exactly as the camera showed. No one on the other side. Just the dark, narrow emergency stairwell with its concrete smell and metal railings. I closed the door until it latched, listened for anyone moving below me, and heard nothing. When I came back upstairs, I locked the PA cabinet. Not because I thought that would stop anything, but because doing nothing felt worse. On Friday morning, I asked one of the facilities guys whether anyone had serviced the PA system recently. He shrugged and said not in months. Then he asked why. I lied and said one of the speakers sounded weak in the back corridor. He told me to put in a ticket. I didn't. That same night, the page came at 12:17 exactly. My name. Then, closer. I didn't move. I don't mean I froze dramatically. I mean I made a decision, very clearly, to stop complying with something I didn't understand. I stood in the center of the operations room and waited. The speakers stayed live for maybe 2 seconds longer than usual. I heard a little static hiss, then the line dropped. After that, the building felt heavier. That's the only word I have for it. Not hostile. Not haunted. Just heavier, as if there were now a second awareness inside the same walls and I had refused a simple instruction from it. I hated myself the moment I thought that. It was exactly the kind of sentence I would have mocked if someone else had said it to me. But being alone for several nights with the same impossible thing changes what your mind is willing to phrase. The following week I made the mistake of trying to solve it logically. I documented the times. I checked whether the pages corresponded to HVAC cycles, system backups, external alarm tests, anything. I called the outside security monitoring line to ask whether their signals could cross into our internal speaker network. They said no. I asked IT whether there were any remote audio functions tied to the operations room cabinet. They said no. I started watching the cabinet itself on the small side monitor while I worked, half expecting to see one of the zone lights blink during the next page. It never did. The cabinet stayed inert every time. The speakers clicked. The voice spoke. The cabinet remained dead. That detail disturbed me more than I admitted to myself. A malfunction is comforting when it visibly malfunctions. Silence from the control panel suggested the voice wasn't coming through the equipment the way it should. It suggested something else I didn't want language for yet. What changed the whole thing from unnerving to truly bad was when the voice stopped being limited to the speaker pattern I had grown used to. Until then, it always came through the building-wide system, ceiling speakers, slight room resonance, that faint public address quality. Then one night, around 12:43, I heard my name from the small wall speaker above the break room door while I was standing in the hallway. Just that one speaker. Not the whole building. It was quieter, almost intimate. I turned so fast I nearly hit the vending machine with my elbow. The hallway around me was empty. The break room light was off. The operations room door stood open at the far end of the hall, my monitor glow visible inside. My name came again from the same speaker. Then, too far. The silence after that felt different because I was no longer sure I was hearing something distributed through a system. It sounded chosen. Localized. As if whatever was doing it knew where I was standing and selected the nearest speaker to address me. I went back to the access logs again. Still nothing. The building said I was alone. I started checking that fact compulsively after every page, like I thought one night the system might finally admit someone else was there. It never did. Sleep started getting strange after about 10 days. I wasn't seeing things. I want to be clear about that. But my body was adapting before my mind did. I'd wake at 12:14 p.m. on my days off with the same anticipatory tension I felt at work around 12:16 a.m. I started hearing little electrical clicks in my apartment and mistaking them for the pre-tone of the PA. Once, while microwaving leftovers, I heard my own refrigerator motor start and my stomach tighten before I even understood why. That was when I realized the problem had stopped being confined to the building. Even when I was away from it, I was listening for it. I finally told my manager after a page said something it shouldn't have known. That night, I had brought a different mug to work because I'd broken my usual one in the sink at home. It was an ugly blue travel mug with a chipped lid. I set it on the desk around 11 o'clock and forgot about it. At 12:17, the speakers cracked on. My name. Then, not your usual cup. There are kinds of fear that arrive fast and kinds that arrive with a slow, private certainty. This was the second kind. The sentence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even explicitly threatening. But it crossed a line I could no longer step back over. I was alone in the building. No cameras pointed directly into the operations room. No one had seen me set that mug down. And whatever was speaking had noticed something specific and recent enough that it could only have come from within my space. I called my manager right then, even though I knew I would wake him. He sounded annoyed for the first 10 seconds and then quieter as I kept talking. He asked me whether I had told anyone else about the pages. I said no. He asked whether anyone had access to the building besides me after hours. I listed the same 3 people I'd always been given. Him. The regional director. Facilities emergency access. Then he asked a question that made me feel worse instead of better. Do you think somebody could already be inside before you lock up? I had never considered that seriously until he said it. Now I did. He told me not to leave the operations room unless I absolutely had to and said he'd be there within 30 minutes. After we hung up, I locked the operations room door from the inside for the first time since I'd started that job. The click of the latch sounded small and temporary. At 12:29, the speaker above the door came on. Not the building system. Just that one. My name. Then, softly, that won't help. I stared at the door until my eyes hurt. The speaker clicked off. I unlocked the door before my manager got there because the idea of explaining why I had locked it felt somehow harder than being alone with the voice. He arrived at 12:47. We walked the whole building together. Every corridor. Every office. Every locked storage space he had keys for. He checked the ceiling access points in the rear hallway. He checked the stairwells. He even made a point of opening the maintenance closet beside the loading corridor, as if giving me the gift of seeing nothing inside it. We found nobody. He looked at the PA cabinet. Tested the zones. Made an announcement himself just to compare the sound. His voice came through the system the normal way, flat, slightly delayed, broader in the rooms beyond us. Not like what I had been hearing. He tried to keep the whole thing practical. Bad wiring. Ghost signal. Remote routing error. Somebody spoofing the building somehow. He kept talking because both of us needed him to. Around 1:10, while we were standing in the main hallway with all the admin lights on, the ceiling speaker above reception clicked. My manager stopped talking mid-sentence. The voice came through and said my name. Not his. Mine. Then silence. I looked at him and saw the exact moment he understood that I hadn't exaggerated anything. He didn't say another rational thing after that. He just said, "Get your stuff." I did. He stayed with me while I shut down my station, lock by lock, screen by screen, until the building looked the way it should before dawn. On the way out, he checked the lobby camera one last time. I only know that because he stopped walking and leaned closer to the monitor. I asked him what it was. He said nothing for a second. Then he told me it was probably just the angle. I looked anyway. The live feed showed the front lobby, empty except for the two chairs against the wall and the reflection from the parking lot lights on the glass. But the hallway opening behind the reception desk looked wrong. Not occupied. Just not empty in the way the rest of the frame was empty. Like the darkness there had a vertical shape to it. Not enough to name. Enough to notice. My manager turned the monitor off. We left through the side entrance. He locked up himself. I never worked another overnight shift in that building. Officially, the company told me they were moving me to a daytime schedule while they inspected the speaker system and reviewed after-hour security. Unofficially, no one ever mentioned it again. Maintenance found nothing wrong with the PA controls. IT found no remote pathway that could trigger local pages without a log. Security found no access anomalies. The whole thing was absorbed into the category companies use for problems they don't know how to own, unresolved. I spent 3 weeks on day shift before I quit. I gave another reason: commute, sleep schedule, wanting something different. No one argued with me. My manager looked relieved. That bothered me more than I expected. Relief meant he believed enough of what happened that losing me felt easier than testing it further. For a while after that, the worst part was how easy it became to explain away when I told it badly. A voice on an old speaker system. A few weird pages. A tired night worker alone in a building too long. If I told it that way, it sounded thin even to me. But that version leaves out the thing I still can't place anywhere rational. It knew where I was. It knew when I moved. It knew what was on my desk. And it always spoke the way someone speaks when they expect to be obeyed eventually. Not trying to scare me. Just correcting distance. Closer. Still there. Too far. As if the conversation had already been happening long before I started hearing my side of it. About 4 months later, one of the women from billing messaged me out of nowhere. We weren't close, but we'd worked the same floor enough to know each other. She asked if I still had any of the old facility's contact numbers because the office phones had been acting strange during a weekend system update. I told her I probably did and asked what was wrong. She replied with a sentence I stared at for a long time before answering. The page system came on twice last night and said somebody's name. I asked whose. She told me it was a man's name she didn't recognize. Then she added, The weird part is it sounded like it was coming from right outside the conference room, not from the ceiling. I didn't reply for almost 10 minutes. When I finally did, I only sent her the facility's number and told her to have maintenance check the cabinet. She thanked me. That should have been the end of it. Except a minute later she sent one more message. "Were you the one who used to work nights there?" I said yes. Then she sent, "Did it ever say yours?" I put the phone down after that and did not answer. I haven't gone back to that building. I've driven past it a few times by accident and felt that same private tightening in my chest when I saw the lit windows on the admin side after dark. I avoid stores with overhead pages late at night if I can. I hate the crackle before announcements now. Hate how every speaker in a ceiling becomes visible to me once I hear it once. And maybe that sounds small compared to what actually happened. But the things that stay with you are rarely the dramatic parts. It's never the big moment. It's the small adaptation afterward. The way your body quietly rewrites itself around a thing you never fully understood. Now when I hear my name in public, there's always a split second before I look up where I'm afraid it won't belong to a person I can see. Sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I still hear that faint pre-tone of an old speaker system clicking live somewhere beyond the room I'm in. And I lie there in the dark waiting for the sentence that always felt closest to whatever it really wanted. Not my name. Not closer. Not still there. The one that sounded like an instruction repeated too many times to someone who wasn't learning fast enough. Don't leave the room.